As we now know, the Canadian Liberal Party, led by Mark Carney, completed the, shall we call it, the Donald Trump upset and won the election. Now, it was close. Carney's Liberals slightly underperformed the opinion polls. Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives slightly overperformed, but just not enough to change the result, and not enough for Poilievre to actually save his own seat. He announced just before that result became known that he intended to stay on as Conservative leader. Not entirely sure how that plays out now. It was an example of how Trumpian politics in practice is provoking a significant backlash, and that in spite of a digital avalanche of disinformation that was fire-hosed at Canadian audiences on social media during the campaign. It's an important indicator because we've seen in the United States how such disinformation has fed deep polarization, basically because the media worlds that people inhabit have become wholly divorced from each other. So fake information, dishonest memes, outright lies, they don't necessarily get exposed for what they are amongst the people most willingly fooled by them, the people who are targeted by them. But in this election, Canadians shown that they are not in the same desperate state as their cousins south of the border. And despite some of said disinformation trying to stoke up the same distrust and cynicism about, for example, the validity of the election process, by and large, Canada remains a higher trust society than the United States has become. Trump broke his relative silence on Canada just before the election, probably simply because he can't help himself, and told Canadians to vote for whoever would be most likely to agree to the country becoming the 51st state of America, which officially, that's nobody. But given Poilievre's association with Trumpian-style messaging, such as suggesting the border with the US isn't secure, and his flirtations with MAGA-style disinformation, like this post, giving the false impression that Trudeau was elected a year earlier than he actually was to try and make a fake cause and effect argument. Given all of that, enough people associated him with Trump's vaguely unhinged messages to at least do him no favours. On the plus side, I'm not aware that Poilievre ever engaged in Trumpian casting doubt on the integrity of the election process. He conceded defeat. He didn't say, "I was cheated." On the negative side, I'm not aware he ever condemned the social media posts in his support that made exactly those sort of claims. I guess he could say that since they weren't getting traction, they didn't need disavowing. But I tend to think that if your cause is right, correct, you should go out of your way not to feed off lies and misleading messaging. And I don't mean the standard political stuff. Like, I have no plans to raise taxes, where you phrased it in a way that means it could be changed once in power thanks to unforeseen events. Standard politicians' bullshit. We would prefer it didn't happen. But those sorts of political lies or obfuscations we know about. They are different from saying, here's a video showing votes being stolen by the other side, when it actually shows no such thing. But that's for another time. The question now for Mark Carney, as he looks at forming his minority government, is what next? He is positioned as the world leader whose election positioning was that of outright hostility to Trump, standing up to Trump's economic attack on Canada. In principle, you would expect him to have many allies across a world that has been thoroughly and deeply shocked by many of Trump's actions in his first 100 days. But at the same time, most other leaders are still in the phony war stage of that. They are working to de-risk their connections with the US, to form alternative trading relationships in the face of US tariffs. They are investing in defense and doing so by buying weapons systems not manufactured in the US, not susceptible to US control. But while they're doing all of that, they are being polite and friendly to Trump because they don't want to provoke him to go fully aggressive against their countries, at least not yet. And that could be a problem for Carney if they're not prepared to take any risks in that. So I've already heard one pair of British journalists, for instance, wondering if Keir Starmer, British Prime Minister, will be forced to choose between the US and Canada, between Trump and Carney. The UK is trying to get this trade deal with Trump to sidestep some of the new tariffs, if at all possible. Well, it may not be possible. The intelligence has been that the Trump team have started on the assumption that it's getting tired to say it now, but nonetheless, they hold all the cards. So they're looking to drive hard bargains in return for tariff relief. And some of the things they want, countries like the UK to abandon food standards that forbid the import of US beef and chicken, treated as they are with hormones and chlorine washing respectively. Those things are not concessions that Starmer would be prepared to make. So it may all cave in relatively quickly, but Starmer has staked a lot on Britain being the American ally who stands firm while others step back. In principle, doesn't mean he can't form whatever trading relationships he wants with other countries and indeed trading blocs. But if Trump's intent is to make life so difficult for Canada with tariffs that it will fall exhausted into his embrace, unrealistic as that may be, he will be extremely hostile to other countries forming trading relationships that might make that less likely. He would describe that as countries ganging up against the United States. Indeed, journalists have been talking about that being a factor should the UK bolster its post-Brexit trading relationship with the EU. Because again, Trump hates the EU and wants to have leverage to make them suffer somewhat. Not with so much malicious intent as he aims at Canada, but even so. So Britain could find Trump to be an extremely jealous partner should it continue to seek his embrace. The same would apply to other relationships that Carney might seek, whether with the EU or with Australia or maybe even with China, problematic though that relationship is currently. Now, Carney is well connected because of his business past. He is, by all accounts, a pretty canny operator, so this may simply be the nature of the challenge that he has to overcome, rather than a major stumbling block. Others have been asking if the rest of the world should take lessons from Canada on the new reality of the Trump world. After all, Australia has its own election forthcoming, and there you also see a Conservative who was expected to win, who said at least a few Trumpy things in his time, now looking to be falling back against the Labour Party. There may be some overlaps, but there's no doubt that what happened with Canada was particularly distinctive because of how Trump had attacked the country directly. Trump is pushing to annex them, to punitively hit them with tariffs with a view to pushing them into that outcome. So unless he moves against Greenland or starts punitive action against Denmark, no other country in the world has been challenged in quite such a direct way. It is, however, a wake-up call for democratic politicians. There's a movement growing worldwide that is testing out MAGA campaign approaches to see where they meet resistance and where they find weakness. Some countries have high-trust societies, and social media attempts to question their elections fall on stony ground, for now. Others are more divided at the start, and the ground is more fertile for such division to be exacerbated. So maybe Germany would be one of those. While other far-right parties in Europe have certainly suffered from the Trump comparison, right now the AfD has been benefiting from early disappointments with the new government coalition that is still forming there. So in a couple of recent polls, they're actually polling in the lead of all the other parties by 1 point. Fertile ground? Or a high watermark they'll never progress beyond? You'd have to be complacent to assume it must be the latter. So is the lesson from Mark Carney's success in Canada that there are no lessons, except that if you nurture the health of your society, the robustness of your democratic systems, you will be able to shrug off many of the tricks and deceptions of those who try to win power by telling lies. This is nothing to do with politics, note. On conservatism generally, There is much honourable history and much good that has been done in different parts of the world under the conservative political umbrella. But the test is whether you attack the democratic system itself, whether you embrace so-called post-truth politics by using disinformation as a routine weapon. That is what divides the MAGA movement autocratic approach to old-style conventional conservatives, whether you love them or loathe them. Now, Poilievre maybe only flirted with that approach rather than going full MAGA. But as Bill Maher pointed out recently in a powerful piece on his programme aimed at Republicans, flirting with authoritarianism is only ever testing the ground for doing more than flirting. If the lesson for the world from Canada is that it is better for all political parties of all colours if they ignore the Trump movement, support their democratic processes, focus on being loyal political participants in seeking the best for their country, in representing the best of what their individual political traditions have to offer, well, that would be a pretty good lesson, I would suggest.